All right, well, one holding by Pirkei Avos, ethics of our fathers, as is known. Again, one holding by Pirkei Avos, ethics of our fathers. This we're holding by chapter 2, Mishnah 16. It's part 40. It's be part 41, 42. I'm sure part 43 also is work our way through. So the Mishnah says, in the name of Rabbi Yeshua, an evil eye, evil inclination, hatred of other people, remove a person from this world. So we were speaking about the evil eye, about jealousy in general, and we've been speaking about a lot of, different aspects of jealousy, how a person could be jealous, why it's lack of emunah, why in general, as we've been speaking about this Rabbeinu Yonah, that a person obviously not happy with what they have. Other people seem to have, better things, more things, better spouse, better kids, this, that, right? So they're basically jealous of things that they don't have. So whatever, we've spoken about that in a lot of different ways. But I was thinking also, the Torah says in the book of Leviticus chapter 19, right? I'm going to get there one day, I'm not sure when. But the Torah there says that it's forbidden to take revenge, and it's forbidden to bear a grudge. Now, I was thinking, is there a connection? Is there a connection, as Rabbeinu Yonah says, we're talking about someone who's jealous, someone not happy with what they have for whatever reason. So I was thinking that if a person, as Rabbeinu Yonah says, is jealous, they seem to lack emunah, the fact that God gives them, what they need or what He wants to give them. Let's say better, they may think they need more or whatever it is, but they look at it and they'll say, "Why don't I have more? Why should this person have more than me? Why should this person be better than me at this or that or who knows what, whatever it is?" So I was thinking in terms of that when a person is jealous, let's say of someone else, now what exactly are they jealous of? They jealous of the fact the person is better than them at things? Are they jealous they have more prestige? They have more honor? They don't feel they deserve? Again, all this stems from a lack of emunah, right? Essentially, because God gives everyone what they need. So a person is, feels that God's not doing his job, God forbid. Right? In other words, God's not really taking care of business because I deserve better, I deserve more. Whatever this is. So I was thinking that maybe all this comes also under this prohibition. We spoke about not coveting, right? One of the 10 Commandments come under that. Certainly, as an umbrella, I would say under that. But what about somebody, not only are they jealous, per se, but it bothers them, right? Essentially, it bothers them, right? Again, what does Rabbeinu Yonah over here say? Rabbeinu Yonah says, what's it going to do? Right? It's going to cause damage to them, to their friends, as the experts of nature would say. Person who desires all that their friend has contaminates the person's thoughts. Right? To think about these things makes them jealous, make them depressed, all that. Very good. Yeah. So now, maybe under this category also, of being jealous, maybe it also means that, a person's not happy, obviously, for any number of reasons. But what's going on a little bit deeper? So what's going on could be a little bit deeper is not only the person not happy with the other person has, but now it bothers them. Okay. So maybe it bothers them a lot. Even if it bothers them a lot, what happens? What happens? A, they're not going to be happy, obviously. But B, it could come under this whole thing by saying that a person is now going to bear a grudge against this other person. Now, bearing a grudge is forbidden. Right? Again, it could be, it's a total lack of emunah. Why is a person bear a grudge against someone else? Now, it could be, obviously they did something wrong. The other person did something wrong, and it bothers them to no end. So what do? They keep it in their heart. They swish it around, so to speak. Think about it. I mean, I'm not going to say, I think about it 24/7, let's say, but they think about it, and it bothers them. And not only does it bother them, what does it do? It creates hatred in their heart, right? It creates enmity. It's a good SAT word, right? Enmity. And we have to see what the difference between this is in the third thing that it says over here, hatred of other people, right? Maybe this is an offshoot over here. That, what does it do? A person thinks about it, and they think about it, and it bothers them. Now, they're not necessarily going to take revenge. Maybe they will, right? Maybe that's part of it. Maybe they'll take revenge against the other person because they feel the person doesn't deserve X, Y, or Z, so they're going to take it into their own hands. Maybe. But even if they don't, let's say that's already going too far. Yeah, but it's in their heart. And they turn it around in their heart. They turn it around in their heart. And what does it do? Makes them angry. Now, again, it could be based on something true and something real. It could be exaggerated. Yeah, maybe, people will say, you're looking at it the wrong way. That's not the way to look at it. Now, we have ways of looking at things. So this is why when a person learns Torah, really, they should learn with someone else. We call it chavrusa. They should learn with somebody else. Because who says the way you look at it, you have the right idea 100%. Yeah. Maybe the way someone else looks at it's right. Maybe the text isn't the way you think it says. Maybe it's the way, someone else is looking at it. But it's good to bounce off ideas because we have, we think a person in general thinks a certain way. Now, most people will say they don't think the same way. Not everyone, obviously, first of all, has the same, same level of knowledge. Some people obviously brighter, than others. Okay. But again, if somebody's learning with someone else, they're bouncing ideas, off them. Each person has their own bias, which is true. We think a certain way. We grew up a certain way. We have certain ideas. Now, again, some of these ideas in Torah may not be right. We may be analyzing something the wrong way. Some people, let's say, have better business background. Some people have less business background. Whatever it is, come across, learning something that's the closest thing to our own understanding, i.e. the laws of damages, right? The laws of business. But again, so someone may understand things more in depth because they have more of affinity to it. Someone else maybe not. But again, what does the back and forth do? The back and forth, takes this topic, whatever it is, you sit there and analyze, and you think a certain way. Okay. Right? Now, the other person doesn't think the same way. Nobody thinks, no person thinks the same. Each person has different ways, of analyzing things, of seeing things. So it's very good. You learn with someone else in order that, you're going to look at a certain topic. You come with certain knowledge. They come with certain knowledge. Maybe you're stronger in some things and, you're weaker in other things that they may be stronger in. So, there's definitely, it's definitely a balance. It's definitely, hopefully, a good balance. And then you see things the way you should, right? Because a person, we only see things usually one-dimensionally. Meaning, we see things the way we think. But obviously, not everyone thinks the way we think. Right now, it doesn't mean what you think is necessarily wrong. Right? We're not saying that that's necessarily wrong, but at the same time, it's always good to bounce ideas off other people to make sure, what you think is, what you think is true, what you think is, you're going, you're going in the right direction. But even with that, right? Even with that, what does a person see? See, a person sees what's in front of them. This person, let's say, caused some damage. Okay. Now, obviously, in the bigger scheme of things, they had it coming, they had to take a loss. God's using this person to make a stick to get to you, but the person is guilty. Very good. Now, person caused someone else damage. Okay. Now, even if they caused damage, what would we say? The person obviously had it coming. Person's gonna take a loss. Very good. Person's gonna take a loss. Now, the other person comes along and causes damage. So the proper way to look at it is, okay, the person's guilty, let's say. God will take care of them, or you'll take care of them also. Not a problem. But what happens? This thing, you understand you had to take a loss. Okay. Even though the person had to take a loss, person causing you the loss. How do you look at that person? Are you hugging them afterwards saying, I want to thank you for helping me work on my anger? Probably not. I think most people are going to do that, even though in Shar Bitachon and Gate of Faith and Belief in God's, in the Chovos Levavos, as he says in Duties of the Heart, that's what we should do. We should be so ecstatic this person gave me an opportunity, to work on anger, right? How many people really holding there deep down, don't know. But, do we have an obligation over here to look the other way? No, you don't have an obligation. Person's guilty. Person, is going to have to pay the price, whatever they did. Okay. Well, let's say everything's done. Person gets punished. Yeah, let's say person gets punished, person gets dealt with. Is that enough for the other person? You'll say it depends what the punishment is. Yeah. Now, a person, did something obviously, not deserving of the death penalty, but they should pay the price. We all want people to pay the price. That is the nature. That's the nature of man. Someone did something wrong, they should pay. Commensurate with what they've done. Yeah, but again, God runs the world. He'll take care of it. Not a problem. But what sometimes happens? Sometimes happens is, even if a person's guilty, we may feel maybe they didn't suffer enough. Maybe, the whole bigger picture is not being looked at because you went through a hard time. You suffered, at this person's hands. Whatever they did. I'm not talking necessarily something so egregious, but you suffered. This person caused you suffering. Good. So now the question is, let's say the person gets punished. Okay. Even if the person gets punished, are we going to say the damage is done? Or not? Are we going to say, okay, the person got punished, I'm walking away. They got, let's say they agree. They got what they deserved. They're happy with the punishment. Okay. So even if they're happy with the punishment, depending on what the person did, could the person still be mad? Person can still be mad. Why would they still be mad? Because it caused damage. They caused a lot more damage even than what the punishment was. Even if they're happy with the punishment. But they caused damage. Wouldn't say it's irrevocable. Wouldn't say the person now, will never be able to function, this and that. I'm not going that far. But the person's still bothered. Why are they bothered? They are bothered by the fact of what the person did. But some people will say, okay, they're out of your life. You don't hear from them anymore. They got punished, let's say. They got dealt with. Okay. But you'll say, even though that's true, you're still affected by what they did. Okay. Now, could be person, they have to deal with this somehow. Let's say, for example, person got bad advice, bad business advice. And what happened when they got bad business advice? They invested money, they lost it, gonzo. Yeah, and what happened? It's a quick bankruptcy, other things. Now, what happened over here? God wanted this person to lose. So what did he do? He gave people advice to give to this person. Say, listen, you can open up another store, you'll make more money. Yeah, they were convinced, for whatever reason. And then that store doesn't do so well and takes the other store doing well, takes it under. Now, in the bigger scheme of things, yeah, the person got bad advice. Okay. But in the bigger scheme of things, what happened? God wanted this person to lose money. So how does God orchestrate it to have them lose money? He gets someone to give them advice, or seemed like good advice at the time. Yeah, they get convinced, and then the pit opens up and they get sunk. That's what happened. That's the bigger scheme of things. Okay. What does this person turn around? What does the person do? He's angry. Person's bitterly angry. Why? Just took all his money, invested it in something, and the whole thing went south. So they're angry. Because they have this chunk of money. It was doing good for, whatever. And now it's gone. Now it's gone. Yeah, so now they're like a failure, among other things. And they have to close shop. It's a bitter thing. It's a hard thing. I'm not saying that. Not here to judge. Right? You can't judge someone unless you've been in their shoes. But I will say one thing. Let's say 10 years later. 15 years later, this story. 15 years later and counting, this person's still bitter. Yeah? They're still bitter. Or it could be for any number of reasons. But see, this is the problem. And the problem is they have a grudge. And what happens when you bear a grudge? It eats you up inside. That's what it does. You'll say, it's unfair. Nobody helped me out. Nobody bailed me out. Even if people could have, nobody did. Nobody said anything. Yeah? No empathy. Now, isn't that kind of hard? Yeah, it reminds me, running for the train in New York. Once my token got jammed back in the day. Token got jammed. I went flying like 30 feet, 50 feet. Now, someone stands over and it's like, wow, it looked like it hurt. Just kept walking. So you say if I was in another place, if I was in, I don't know. If I would have been in the Midwest or somewhere else, maybe, people would come running over, someone would come help me, pick me up, whatever. Okay, I was in New York, different thing. Right? After that happened, I'm like, I must be in the wrong place here. In any case, something happens, and we feel people should empathize. Now, people don't empathize. They don't empathize. What does that do? People you would expect to empathize. That make you feel bad? Nobody there. I'm not saying they have to pay you, they have to out, but there's nobody there. So 100%, would a person be upset? Sure. Would they have a right to be upset? You can say, yeah. But if you're expecting something from people that have a 25 IQ and you should never expect something like this from them, then, you're barking up the wrong tree. You're not going to get sympathy. If a person doesn't have a sympathetic bone in their body, they're not going to show sympathy. They're not going to show empathy. So the bigger scheme of things, don't expect it. Okay. right? I hate the statement, expect nothing, whatever you get is a bonus. Yeah. Sometimes a person has to think that way. So in the bigger scheme of things, nothing. You got nothing there. Now, isn't that aggravated? Aggravated. Would a person have a right to be upset? Sure. Not going to take anything away. Person has a right to be upset. But you got to see the picture, bigger picture. You got to see what people are capable of and not capable of. If they're not capable, you can't expect them to be capable. Yeah? If someone's mentally challenged, you can't expect them to do things that they're not capable of doing. Right? So now, so why do I bring all this up? Why do I bring all this up? Because 15 years later, the person's still mad. And even if I would agree, right? Even if I would agree, the person has every right to be mad. Right? Many things. He's got a right to be mad. No question. No question. But you're going to let it get in your head 15 years? For people that are mentally challenged? And you're going to let it bother you for so long? Any psychologist, which I'm not one and I didn't play one on TV either, any psychologist will tell you that's bad. You got to get help for that. They'll talk them through it. They'll say, why are you angry? Whatever, and they'll deal with them. They'll deal with them however they deal with them, help them get through it. But that 100% is a total prohibition. Prohibition of bearing a grudge. Because what comes along with this? What comes along with it is what we've been saying for weeks. What comes along with it is the idea that this should never have happened. Should never have happened. I didn't deserve it to happen. See, the problem is other people around them still have money and still have plenty of money. They didn't lose anything. This person lost everything. Yeah. So, their credit's going to be bad for years. And everyone else is like, well, oh, well, stuff happens. And they move on. This person's like, fuming. You're not worried where your next meal is going to be. You don't worry, whatever. It's also embarrassing. I mean, this happens all the time. People shut down businesses. Businesses go sour. They go south. Some people have to declare bankruptcy, save themselves. Okay, it's a whole question, bankruptcy according to Torah. Just because you declare bankruptcy doesn't mean you don't owe money to people. Yeah, maybe in the secular world, but certainly not in the Torah world. Still owe money to people. But anyway, it's not the point. So now, this is a major thing, not a small thing. Not a small thing. But in the bigger scheme of things, yeah, according to the Torah, they're in trouble. Because the bearing a grudge is forbidden. I mean, not to mention all the unhealthy things that psychologists will tell you exactly what Rabbeinu Yonah says, right? 500 years ago. He says, you stir it around, you think about it. What does it do? Right? Causes bad feelings, causes depression, causes you to hate others, etc. Even if you're right. Right? Even if you're right. So this could certainly come up, when we're talking about jealousy. Because in this case, right, I think this is a good example. This person loses, they lose all their money. So they're angry because other people looking around not doing anything to help them. Have no empathy, even if they could help them, let's say. But there's no empathy. So the rip roaring mad against that. Makes sense. Makes perfect sense. But at the end of the day, what does it do to a person? In other words, you're going to let it go so long. You're going to let it go so long. What's going to happen? It's going to eat you up inside. And everybody and their mother will tell you it's not healthy. Right? It's totally not healthy. So now, what could this lead to? Let's say they're surrounded by other people living the lap of luxury, and they got plenty of money, It's not the same. It's not fair. What would happen to me? It's not fair. So maybe give me a portion of this. Help me out. I don't know if they're saying that. They're not saying that. Right? But what are they essentially saying? Essentially, they're saying, I want what they have. And this never should have happened. Never should have happened. Yeah, and that eats a person alive, which everyone agrees is bad. So the two, I think, really go hand in hand. Because why? Because when you bear a grudge against somebody, now it could be something they did. Okay. And you probably have, let's say, we'll make it easy, you have a right to be angry. 100%, you have a right to be angry. Okay. Now, even if you have a right to be angry, even if you have every right to be angry, so you'll say it only leads to anger. And it's going to eat yourself alive on the inside, like Rabbeinu Yonah says. Okay. Going to make you depressed. Going to cause you to dislike others. Okay, but there's something else here. Because now you're saying, as we said before, we said many times, it's about saying life isn't fair. It never should have happened. Okay, maybe it shouldn't have happened, but it did. It got orchestrated. They don't want to hear that. Got orchestrated. Okay. But what does that lead to? It leads to bitterness, leads to anger, but it goes beyond that. Because if you're going to say, okay, over time, let's say they don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. It takes years for them to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And they're still mad it took so long and this and that, and their credit's ruined and other things. Okay. But what happens? What happens in the end? What happens in the end is a mind-boggling thing. Yeah, what happens, I shouldn't say it's so mind-boggling, but think about it. To this day, 15 years later, there's still a grudge. They're still mad. Yeah, now being mad the same as burying a grudge, they have a very strong grudge. Very, very strong grudge. So in most things that this person has a grudge on, I would agree 100%. Person's 100% right. 100% right. Yeah. And being angry and everything else. No sympathy, no empathy. Okay. But even if that's true, the Torah says that's bad. We understand why it's bad. Right? Right? But at the end of the day, who's calling the shots? Who's calling the shots? God's calling the shots. Someone there points out, very good. Only God himself can bail you out. True. 100% true. Yeah, Rabbeinu speaks about this all the time. He should be well. He speaks about it all the time. And he says, we think this person's the cause, that person's the cause, but they don't look at the cause. Yeah, and at the end of the day, the darkest of days, God can come along and save your behind. Right, we'll keep this clean. Right, He can save you from a place you never ever expected. Never expected. That's normally where it happens. It's exactly where it happens. Never happens where you expect it. Right, but when a person bears a grudge and they say it's their fault, now if you look at it in humanistic terms, you're right. This person gave advice. Yeah, whatever the advice was based on. And they listened. Maybe they investigated, maybe they didn't, whatever, but they relied on someone, been in business, let's say, for 20 years. Yeah. So they relied on someone else. Okay, whether you should or not, doesn't matter. But they relied on someone else. Someone else did the research. Okay. Maybe they missed something, maybe they didn't miss something, whatever it is. Right? They took the bait. And they did it. They pulled the trigger. Okay? Well, they pulled the trigger, potentially knowing, it doesn't mean everything's going to go smooth, but thinking that they're going to do very well from this. So what happens? They got burnt. So now they're roaring mad, which makes sense. And they're going to complain to who? The person gave me advice. They're going to go back and say, you idiot, look what you did to me. They said, listen, based on our information, this never should have happened. Maybe we'll call it Lamala Minotev, it's above nature. Yeah? But it happened. Certain things they didn't expect to happen happened. Now, again, if you're giving someone business advice, you're going to analyze every nook and cranny. Maybe this could happen, maybe that could happen. I mean, whatever. You're going to put it through a thorough analysis. Now, is it possible they could miss something? Sure. Not fallible, right? Not infallible, let's say. They could make mistakes, or maybe something happened they didn't expect. They never would have expected. Yeah, that can also happen. Right? Something totally out of the blue that messed it up. Okay. That's not their fault. It's not something they could have expected. Now, let's turn it around. If it's something they were negligible in, and the person took the bait, and the person didn't investigate for themselves, and they took their words, but they were negligible, yeah, they didn't look into everything they should have, so that person got burnt, 100%. So you say they should have looked into it more, okay? They're relying on people that are bigger experts than them. Yeah, if it's something, if they looked into it, let's say it's something impossible they could have found out, then that's Lamal Minateva, that's above nature. If it's something they could have found out about, and they didn't, or they did, they warned the person said, Alpha PK, and even so, I'm going to do it, and they get burnt, it's their fault. I don't want to say that, but it's their fault. So in all this, whatever happens, the dust settles. What happens? What happens? They bear a grudge against the person who gave them the advice. And they still bear a grudge. Right? Which is debilitating. It's debilitating to a person. Obviously, they don't see God in the picture. They don't see the bigger picture in general. Yeah? You can say, a person goes bankrupt or, potentially bankrupt a number of times. Yeah, you earn things. It's always good to have a lot of money like Trump. So, you go bankrupt a number of times, you're not going to be down for that long. You still have money. But even so, the grudge is there. And what does the grudge do? The grudge will make you angry against this person or against other people. And if you don't deal with it, it just festers. That's the word. It festers. And the more it festers, the worse it is. Because you're never going to let the person off the hook. Because of what they did and how they did it. Okay? Yeah, but it goes further than that. It's not just on this person. It's even people around them. And the people around them that are well off. Right? And they're not suffering. And they're not necessarily going through hardship. Doesn't mean they're always making money. How do they view them? How in the world do they view them? They view them in a negative way. Again, when they should help, not help, that's not the point. They're looking at what they have. And now they're saying, I could have had that. Or I could have had something similar to that. Or, whatever. But now they don't have anything. So they're looking at what other people have. Those are going to cause jealousy. Right? So this seemingly goes hand in hand. Because a person saying, it's not fair what happened to me. Should never have happened to me. Okay, but it did. So the question is, how's it viewed? And that can lead to what? That can lead to anger for sure. But that can also lead to the fact that a person is bearing a grudge. Right? And that's what it leads to. It's a total prohibition. Yeah. Now again, I'm not saying it's an easy thing to go through. And the person suffered, true. In a lot of ways. Imagine all this transpires, and people around them, like, there's no sympathy, there's no empathy. Make them more angry. We're expecting them necessarily to bail you out, whatever, a good word, something. I can understand that. Yeah, that makes it worse. But if a person has a 25 IQ and they're not capable, you can't expect that. You want to be angry, okay. But how can you expect something from somebody? We've spoken about this, many times. How can you expect something from somebody that doesn't have the capability? That you can't do. That's that's putting something in front of you that I'm not going to say it's a stumbling block, but it's putting something in front of you that it's something you can never expect. If a person never showed an empathetic, they don't have an empathetic bone in their body, and they never will, 20 years later, 50 years later, it's never going to change. What in the world can you expect? As we said, expect nothing. Whatever you get is a bonus. Okay. Well, think about it. This is what Rabbeinu Yonah says. That it's going to cause jealousy. It's going to burn inside of them. But it goes further. Because the burning inside, what does it do? It doesn't leave, you're not going to let the person off the hook. You're going to keep that anger within, and you're not going to let it out. You're not going to give in and see the person in any light except for this. That's very negative. I'm saying you have to be best friends with this person or whatever, but still, that skews the way we look at them. Right? And maybe, let's say maybe it's not as bad as we've portrayed it. Let's say. But it's also based on some misconceptions. Some people will say, you're looking at it in the wrong way. You're bearing a grudge for no reason. But what's the other person going to say? I have my reason. My reason stands. And it's a good reason, according to them. But let's really say, maybe the way they're viewing it's a little bit skewed. Maybe it's a lot skewed. So someone comes along trying to help them. And the person says, you have to look at it from a different perspective. You have to look at it from their perspective. Sometimes it's very hard to do. You don't want to hear their perspective. Let's say even, we'll call a spade a spade. Let's say you know what their perspective is. You 100% know what their perspective is. You don't like it. Not that you don't understand it, right? But maybe understanding it will make you realize that they're not really totally wrong. But you have this bias and you have this chip on your shoulder, whatever, and you're looking at it in a total different way, which is probably the wrong way. Most likely the wrong way. But, it's very hard because you're in it. And once you're in it, to take a step aside, take a step back, or to look at it from the outside, from an unbiased position. Now, this is going to depend how stubborn a person is, and how right they really want to be. Because at the end of the day, what happens? They don't want to give in. Even if they understand, sometimes the person, they'll understand where the other person's coming from. But that doesn't change anything. Why doesn't it change anything? Now, it could be they don't want to give the person the benefit of the doubt. Could be they don't want to see them in a good light. Right? It could be the way they're viewing it is skewed. Can also be they don't care what the other person says. Right? Doesn't matter to them what they think. No, that could be ego, it could be other things. Right? But why don't they care? Because they think they're right. They think the way they've seen it is right. Now, woe to them when they find out the way they saw it is really wrong. Yeah? So again, this gets in a whole nother thing. But when they see it, we have our own biases, right? This is really the point. We have our own biases. We see things the way we see them. And when you're more emotionally involved, it's very hard to step back That's the word I was looking for. It's very hard to step back and look at it, not put a positive spin on it, but look at it objectively. Right? That's why we need mentors, rabbis, whatever the situation is. You ask them a question, whatever, how to analyze the situation from an unbiased perspective. Because you're not emotionally, that person, let's say, that mentor, that rabbi, whatever, is not emotionally involved. It's not as emotionally charged for them because they're not in it. But this person's in it. So now, the person has the ability to give advice. You have to look at the whole picture, from all sides, and hopefully be able to give advice. But their advice can be totally unbiased because they're not in it. And that when we're stuck, we have to get advice. How to handle this situation or that situation, or, we may think we know how to handle it. We may be right, but you want to get that confirmed. You don't want to act before, you cause other problems, right? And I just read an article recently, someone was saying that there, a number of cases, they got blown up, out of proportion, could have been mitigated and solved in a much easier way had they got proper advice. In other words, they didn't seek proper advice. They acted on their own. They didn't seek proper advice. And what happened? They got burnt. That happens. And, again, even remember, even if you get, good advice, and you ask the mentor rabbi and you got the right advice. Getting the right advice doesn't mean the situation goes away, exactly the way we planned, and everything comes out smooth. I can tell you from personal experience, certain things I had to do. I listen to my Rebbe usually, and I can come out smelling like a rose. I can tell you that. Right? So I always say it's only damage control. Right? It's only how much damage you're gonna, how much damage you're gonna do. I didn't come out smelling like a rose, but listen, I did what I had to do. Unpleasant, a number of things. Okay, you dealt with a certain hand. You got to do certain things. Certain things you can't get around. Right? Certain things don't change. Right? People get offended. Okay. Yeah, but you got to do your best not to, sometimes you're put in a situation. The situation is a no-win situation, right? And the way the situation goes, that's it, right? You did what you could do. The Torah, as we always say, is not a pretzel, right? You can't turn the Torah into a pretzel. That's it, right? So you can't do anything. The only question is how much you're going to get screamed at, right? Yeah, how much, how little, whatever, right? You try and do the best you can do. But sometimes there's nothing to do. But holding it within, and certainly, not seeing the bigger picture, this certainly can lead to jealousy. But through that, person also transgresses over here, having, bearing a grudge, which is a severe prohibition. Yeah, it is a severe prohibition for a lot of reasons. One is what it does to the person themselves. As Rabbeinu Yonah over here says. Yeah, it's going to affect them in a totally negative way. It's going to affect people around them, right? It's going to affect, totally going to affect people around them. And therefore, it's not going to be good, right? In many cases, it's not going to be good. But it's going to be worse for the person themselves. Going to affect them in a totally negative way, which will lead to jealousy and lead to, bearing a grudge. And if a person keeps that grudge, what all it does is fester inside. All it does makes the person more angry because you keep feeding it with more anger, right? You keep remembering the same situation, how bad you felt, and you leave it there. You don't deal with it, you just get angry. Now again, the anger could be justified. What I'm saying is not justified. Could very well be justified. Obviously, in the bigger scheme of things, we should never be angry. One of the worst transgressions a person can do, right? Why would a person lose their cool? Why should they lose their cool? Everything's, decreed from above. I believe in God. This is what's supposed to be, let's say. So what's the problem? Okay, we get in a lot of different situations, the heat of the moment, other things. Okay, but really, person should be on equilibrium all the time. Nothing should really bother them, right? The reason nothing should should never bother them is very simple. God runs the world. He does what he needs to do. We do what we need to do. So what are you worried about? God's the one in charge. He's the one who takes care of business. Yeah, but this is hard. That's hard. The other thing's hard. Right? Okay. Right? So what's the simple answer? Why doesn't the person have that equilibrium? Because we get beaten down a line. That's the answer. And it's hard to have that equilibrium when a million things are going on, right, at the same time. Someone here mentions very good. When is jealousy permissible? Right, we spoke about this a few weeks back. When is jealousy permissible? When someone's learned more Torah than you, right, and you're jealous of their knowledge. Good. That's a good type of jealousy. That for sure is a good type of jealousy. Yeah, but just about every other part of every other aspect of jealousy is bad, right? 100%. 100%. 100% is bad. But yeah, when it comes to Torah, very good. So that type of jealousy is not bad. Right? That is true. Somebody asks, take some questions here. Somebody asks, it's possible to grudge a spiritual parasite. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Grudge, any bad character trait. Anger, right? Being conceited, which the ways of the righteous, and the Orthodox Tzaddikim says it's the base of all bad character traits, right? Being conceited. And everyone has anger at some level. Some people, more, some people less, right? Whatever it is, but it's a spiritual parasite, sure. Yeah. Because what does it do? I mean, many bad character traits, I would say, are spiritual parasites. But what do they do? What does this do in general? All it does is fester up bad emotions. Yeah, all it's going to do is going to make you more angry, right? Anger, one of the worst character traits a person can have, right? So, even if a person, because the Rambam says, even if a person has to discipline a child, yeah, even if you have to show anger to really make the point, to the best of your ability, you got to fake it. What does it mean you have to fake it? In other words, you can't. First of all, you can't punish when you're angry. That's really forbidden because the kid will never get the message. The punishment has to fit the crime. But in general, even if you're going to show anger, and you have to show that the kid's doing something wrong, you have to show anger, right? But even if you show anger, says the Rambam, I'm sure many others agree, that showing anger means that you have no tinge of anger in your heart. None. Because that's going to affect you in a negative way. Totally affect you in a negative way. So, yeah, if you have to punish, let's say you have to, show anger, you got to be the greatest actor in the world or actress in the world. You gotta fake it. It should not affect you, right? And the reason is because anger is bad. Any tinge of anger is bad, right? In general. So therefore, if you're gonna be angry and you have to show anger, you're gonna win an Academy Award for it, right? You got to show you're gonna be the best actor or actress in the world. That the anger doesn't affect you. Yeah, somebody asks if a person who wronged you doesn't hold by Torah mitzvahs, okay, do I have any obligation to forgive them? What if they never even said they're sorry? Yeah, if they don't believe in Torah principles, why should I give them the benefit of the doubt? Good. So that's very good. In other words, the Chofetz Chaim in the laws of Lashon Hara says that a person, if they don't keep Torah mitzvahs, right, they have no believability. Because they have no believability, I have no obligation whatsoever to what we call Danu Chafschus. I do not have to judge them if they're if they're caught in a sticky situation, right? Let's say they're caught in a situation where it really looks bad. I have no obligation whatsoever to judge them favorably if they don't keep Torah mitzvahs. If it's somebody sometimes sins, but they keep Torah and mitzvahs, even if they're in a compromising position that looks really bad. I get an obligation to judge them favorably. Otherwise, not holding by Torah and mitzvahs, and we know they transgress all the time, doesn't matter why, right? A lot of it based on desire, but okay. But even if that's true, I have no obligation to judge them favorably. So the person asked, that was just a way of introduction, but if someone has wronged you, do you have any obligation to forgive them? You should forgive them. Even if they have wronged you. Doesn't matter if they're observant, they hold by Torah mitzvahs. You should forgive them anyway. You're going to say, what if they never even said sorry? Again, keep in mind, this is good. It's coming into the new month of, new month of El, have 30 days of introspection. That, if we look away, measure for measure, right? If we look away from what other people have done to us, again, I'm not going to say this is easy to do. I'm not talking about trauma either. But let's say someone did something wrong against us. Even if they don't ask forgiveness, we should forgive them. We should forgive them. Now, it might not be such an easy thing to do. But measure for measure, if we forgive somebody that did something to us, all the terrible things we did to God, God's going to look the other way, what we did against him. Now someone's going to say, but that's very hard to do. Okay, I didn't say it was easy. Right? I made that statement at the beginning. This is not an easy thing to do. Now, if they're in a compromising situation, do you have to judge them favorably? No. Absolutely not. Now, do you have to forgive them? So good. This is a good question, because you'll say, if you don't forgive them for what they've done, let's say you don't forgive them, did you transgress anything? Could lead to anger, could lead to bearing a grudge. So I would say it's best to try and forgive them, even if they don't ask for forgiveness. They don't ask for forgiveness. Now, you'll tell me, if it's something that is, that causes trauma, other things, then it's probably not, it's probably a mitzvah not to have to accept, not to forgive them if they come for forgiveness. Certain things are unforgivable. Not everything necessarily is forgivable. I would say, if it's possible to be able to forgive them, doesn't matter if they ask you for forgiveness or not. If it's possible to forgive them, you should. If it's too hard, we'll make it very easy. They didn't come to you ask for forgiveness. So if they don't come to ask you for forgiveness, who says you have to forgive them? Very good. Who says you have to forgive them? Does it go beyond the letter of the law, what we call lifnei mishur sadin, right? Beyond the letter of the law? Really, if they don't ask you for forgiveness, do you have to forgive them? No. You don't necessarily have to forgive them. Probably a good thing if you did, right? You got to remember, if you say the Shema before you go to sleep, the paragraph you say before the Shema, it's all about if anyone did anything to me, in a previous life or whatever, you forgive them. So no one has to really forgive anybody before Yom Kippur. So I asked the great rabbi this question once. So why do we have to ask forgiveness? Right? If that's the case, and that is the prayer we say before we go to sleep, and the whole thing is, and that whole paragraph is all about what, if someone did anything against me, I forgive them. Shouldn't have to ask forgiveness before Yom Kippur. Right? So what was the answer I got? The answer was, halavai, you meant it. In other words, if everybody would say Kriyat Shema before they go to sleep, and they say that paragraph, no Jew should have to ask forgiveness from someone else. I'm not talking about non-Jews. No Jew should have to ask forgiveness from anyone else. Nobody. Because you already forgave them. So if you already forgave them, if you forgave anyone who ever did anything bad to you, so Yom Kippur is a walk in the park. Should be a walk in the park. It would only be between you and God. You don't have to worry about what you did against someone else, because they already forgive you. And you already forgive them, so everything's great. Right? Start playing the guitar and singing Kumbaya. That'd be beautiful. Right? But you had to mean it. Most people, when they say that, they don't mean it. They say it, but they don't mean it. Because think about it. If you thought about what the words meant, Yeah, simple explanation. Forget about Kabbalah or anything else. Simple explanation. You're about to fall asleep. Yeah, you say this paragraph. You really mean it? Anybody who did anything against you, you really mean it? Forget about trauma. I'm not talking about trauma. Do 100%. Do you really mean it or not? And most people will say it, but they don't mean it. That's why you have to ask for forgiveness. Yeah. So really technically, if they don't ask for forgiveness, should you forgive them? You should. Do you have to? No, you don't have to. Problem is that, again, what's that going to do though? First of all, be resentful. The person may be angry at them. Okay, you don't forgive them. Okay. Is it not forgiving someone, again, unless it's like total trauma or anything else? Is it not forgiving them? What do you call it? Bearing a grudge? Isn't that bearing a grudge at some level? It's bearing a grudge. So you should forgive them. If you're going to say you don't really bear a grudge, but I don't forgive them, somewhere, you want to say somewhere in between, it's kind of hard. If a person doesn't forgive someone, what normally happens? What normally happens? You don't forgive somebody. You're angry. You're angry at what they did. Now, if you're angry at what they did, yeah, we'll make this very simple, right? You're angry at what they did, that's bearing a grudge. 100% is bearing a grudge. That's going to be bearing a grudge. So I would say it's better in the long run to forgive them than, even if they don't ask for forgiveness, even if they're not holding by Torah mitzvahs. Again, you should forgive them because it leads to other bad things. But at the same time, if it wouldn't lead to bearing a grudge and other things, then yeah, you wouldn't have to. You wouldn't have an obligation. You wouldn't have an obligation to forgive them. But I would say, that when it comes to, measure for measure here, if we look, again, away from what other people do to us, God's going to look away from what we do to him. So the bigger scheme of things, it's better to try and forgive them. Again, if you can't, you can't, right? It would be worse if they ask you for forgiveness. If they ask you forgiveness, you don't forgive, that's a different problem, right? But if they didn't ask, technically speaking, you want to put me down? No. You don't have to forgive them. You don't have to forgive them, right? If it's going to lead, though, to anger, and it's going to lead to bearing a grudge, right? Which are both Torah prohibitions. Yeah, so then it's probably not worth it. Yeah, if it's not going to lead to that, fine. Then, you don't have an issue. You wouldn't have an issue. I would think it's going to lead to bearing a grudge. And if it leads to bearing a grudge, then yeah, then that would be forbidden. So then someone says, wow, if they don't believe in Torah, why should I give them the benefit of the doubt? You don't have to. Right? But giving the benefit of the doubt over here means that they're in a situation where it looks really bad. If they're in a situation, they're in a compromising situation. Yeah, it looks really bad. They're not holding by Torah mitzvahs 100%. I have no obligation to judge them faithfully. None. Yeah. If it's talking about an Orthodox Jew, and most of the time they do the right thing, and they go in the right path, then I have an absolute obligation to give them the benefit of the doubt, even if it looks really bad. But if they're not holding anywhere in the world, they have no believability. Anything they say, you don't have to believe them, right? In general, so if you don't have to believe them, right, you don't have to give them the benefit of the doubt, right? That would be the case. Yeah, somebody God uses someone as a stick, right? As we always say, God's using them to get to you. Okay. Yeah, and at the same time, this person proves to be an animal. Very good. Why can't there be for more abuse? Right? Doesn't allow preserving our life come into play. Yeah, our life comes first. That's for sure. That is for sure. But keep in mind, you're right. God could use this person to get to you. And let's say the person's an animal. Very good. Is the person guilty? Person guilty. I have to give the benefit of the judge in such a case? No. Certainly not. The only thing is that God is using that person to get to you. Could have used anybody to get to you. Yeah. What did God do? So for whatever reason, he was someone who's, let's say, verbally abusive. Could be physically abusive even. Yeah. Yeah. So a person could ask, what did I do to deserve that? So, that's the $1 million question. That's a $1 million question. So let's say, for argument's sake, in this world, you didn't do anything to deserve that. Maybe you deserve other things, but not that. So then you have to say it's because what your soul has to go through. Okay. Yeah, but God is using that person to get to you. Very good. Even the person's an animal. Yeah, let's say. Even if they're an animal. Now, question's going to be, if it's this type of abuse is something really traumatic, you don't have to accept it. If they come to ask for forgiveness, you really have to forgive them? No. But, in the bigger scheme of things, it's going to be a very hard thing to do. But in the bigger scheme of things, you're right. God uses person as a stick. Now, this person might be a disgusting person, and God will deal with them. Okay. Right? Yeah. But your anger is not at the person. Really, the anger should not be at the person. God used them to get to you for whatever reason. Yeah. I'm not saying you should be angry at God, but that's where it comes from. That's where it comes from. The problem, the problem is that, okay, this happened. Let's say we'll make it easy, right? We won't make it so disgusting. Let's say a person over, number of years. Let's say a person married someone, let's say, or even if they're not married, whatever, they know someone, and a person gets verbally abused a lot. Yeah, it affects them. Legitimately has an effect. Scare the person. I'm saying they're physically abused. Physical abuse is another thing, right? Let's say they're verbally abusive. Psychologically abusive can be just as bad. Anyone who's ever dealt with anyone's narcissist, yeah? They're hard to deal with. Psychological abuse. 100%. Yeah, plenty want to be said for that. Plenty want to be said for that. But even so, it has an effect. Right? Verbal abuse has an effect, has a tremendous effect. Yeah. So now a person can say, well, you get this person out of your life, this person's toxic and whatever, they threaten, they do other things. Again, therapy, person certainly may need therapy to, get over this. It's a certain level of trauma also. A person stalked or a person is, verbally abused or even bullied or whatever. Okay. Right? Now, that being said, knowing the bigger picture and this and that, when a person's gone through something like that, it's not enough. Right? It's not enough. Now, people have claims against me and say, why doesn't Torah fix that? Because, we're very frail psychologically. So a person would really have to step outside the box over here and really be steeped in the Torah to be able to do this. And most people can't do it. Most people have to go through therapy to do it. Torah's not going to will it. But again, a person goes, let's say, from therapists, religious therapists, or whatever, they're going to tell you certain things based on Torah. Based on Torah knowledge. Not just based on, secular things. But even so, all the Torah in the world is not going to help over here. Person feels bad about themselves, they have low self-esteem, relationships toxic, cause other problems, cause other serious problems. These things have to be unraveled step by step. Being steeped in Torah doesn't get rid of it. Maybe it helps, but doesn't get rid of it. Right? I'd love to be a big believer that's the case, but it's not the case. Right? It's definitely not the case. But seeing it from a Torah perspective certainly helps. Right? It certainly helps. So you're gonna say, well, this person was abusive. Okay. And then they're gonna analyze, how did it make you feel? Well, what triggered it? And, they could come out and say, listen, obviously this person has problems. They have anger issues, right? Let's say. Could have other issues as well. Right? Now, if you understand where they're coming from, I'm not gonna say it's gonna help 100%, right? Let's say you understand what happened to them when they were younger. Usually someone who bullies someone else usually was bullied as a kid. Usually they were bullied when they were younger. Yeah, usually. right? So now, let's say you understand all that. You understand they came from a broken home. Let's say one of the parents was an alcoholic. Let's say, like a lot of things you understand intellectually. You understand where the person came from. You understand it's not necessarily their fault. Okay, but this is how they're acting because the influence others have had on them. Let's say. Does the person walk away from that and say, okay, now I feel better? They're going to say, okay, I'm totally healed because I understand where the person came from. They're still in pain. 100%, they're still in pain. They're still going to be in pain for what the person did. Now, you can empathize a little bit more. You can understand where it's coming from. But does that pain ever go away? That's the question. If a person understands why the person did it, let's say, and why the person may continue to do it, does that change the situation or not? If the person's not willing to go for help or willing to change, it doesn't change anything. Right? It just means you understand, you feel bad for them. You can empathize for what they've gone through, and different people have had influences on their lives. But if they don't pick up, they don't pick up the ball and they're not willing to change, yeah, all the Torah understanding and all the mental gymnastics is great, but it doesn't change the situation. The person's still the same way they are. It's still going to be degrading and and making fun and doing things and making a person feel like a piece of dirt, and all that doesn't change. That aspect doesn't change. Yeah. The only thing that changes is that you look at it in a way where, okay, I understand where it comes from. The person needs help to unravel because of all that influence. That person needs to speak to somebody to unravel it, to get to the point where they don't keep doing this. They don't keep doing the negative behavior. The other person can't help that. Unless they know certain techniques or whatever, and they're able to help the situation. Well, they're probably not going to be able to help the situation. Right? So that's part of the issue also. Is that, even if you know what the person's gone through, and they still say certain things. Now, if you look at someone, as we said before, you look at someone, they have a 25 IQ. Yeah. A person's narcissist. Are you ever going to change someone who's narcissist? No. Unless they themselves want to change. Well, they're not going to change, right? If they're not going to change. What they say can be offensive. They don't care. They don't show empathy, different things. Very good. They only think about themselves. That's what someone who's narcissist. They only think about themselves. Okay. Now, if you understand that, intellectually, you understand they're never going to change, and that's who they are. And that's exactly who they are, let's say. Now, that gives you a lot of power. Because no matter what they say or what they do, you're not going to be affected. It's going to be like, you're going to be like Teflon. Why are you going to be like Teflon? You're going to be like Teflon because these people, even if you have to deal with them, if they're, a parent or a sibling or whatever, you're not going to let them get under your skin because you know where they're coming from. Because you know exactly who they are. Now, what they could say, could be offensive. Definitely could be. Now the question is, how am I viewing it? Right? If I understand that's who they are, if I understand they're never going to change, they're never going to go to therapy, they're never going to change, right? So when you talk to them, they just like pull off anything you say. They live in their own world. Yeah. They don't, they don't, they don't really care what's going on in your life. It's all about them. You're not going to change them. You're never going to change them. Now, the only question is, okay, you have contact with them. So you tell them certain things. So go on to something else. You move on. You'll never have that type of close relationship. It'll never happen. Right? That'll never happen. But here's a little bit different. Here you understand the person's sick. The other case also. Right? You understand the person's sick. Yeah. Now, if this person won't go for therapy, they won't, and you have to deal with them anyway. And sometimes, conversations aren't good. Okay, but you understand. You're dealing with someone who's very sick. Now, in some other case where it's more, more abusive, so that, that's not just going to look at them as being sick. That you got to take a step back, 10 steps back. You have to get out of that relationship, right? Or at least, bring it down or whatever. Right? That's what you got to do. Otherwise, People in toxic relationships never ends well, right? 100% never ends well. So in this case, right? In this case, so you're gonna say, doesn't law preserving your own life come into play? Sure. And something like this is very toxic. God forbid, as we always say, if a person, God forbid, is cancer, what do? You burn it out. Most cases, you burn it out. In this case, someone's toxic, whether it's verbal abuse, whether it's bullying or other things, you get out of that relationship as quick as possible, right? So you don't get affected by it, right? But you're right. You have to look for your own life. That's true. Even if that God has used that person as a stick, doesn't mean you have to, it's not like all over twist. Come on, you turn the other cheek. That doesn't mean that. Doesn't mean I have to stay in that relationship if it's toxic, right? Because they say, well, God used the stick to get to me. Very good. Yeah, but the stick is poison. If the stick is poison, you run away from the stick. Understand, God sent it to you, okay, for whatever reason, right? But you have absolute obligation to account for your life. That's true, right? That is true. Somebody asks why in the morning prayers say, I forgive every Jew and not every person. Because a non-Jew, I don't have to forgive. Who says I have to forgive a non-Jew? Jews, we have to forgive. We talk about confessions between you and God and between, man and man. Man means between you and another Jew, right? But if you did something, let's say you did something wrong to another Jew, don't you have to ask him for forgiveness? Don't you have to tell them you're sorry? Sure. You should. 100% you should. Yeah. But it's really only between Jews and Jews. Doesn't mean I can do whatever I want to a non-Jew. Doesn't mean that. Doesn't mean I can steal from them. Doesn't mean I can mislead them, per se. It doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that. Yeah. Yeah. But if, technically speaking, if a non-Jew does something against you, let's say they really feel bad, they come to you. And they ask for forgiveness. You should forgive them. You should forgive them. Now, do you have to? No. You don't have to. I mean, the Torah talks about, we said before, bearing a grudge. Can I bear a grudge against a non-Jew? They did something wrong against me? I could. It's only about a Jew, not a non-Jew. But isn't it bad to bear a grudge against anybody? Yeah. Shouldn't it apply to non-Jews as well? Should. Doesn't mean it does. Yeah. Angry. Couldn't I be angry at a non-Jew technically? Technically. Is it a good thing to be angry in general at anybody? No. Is it good to bear a grudge against anybody, even if I had the right to? No. I could, in the sense of a non-Jew, I could. So what? So what if I bear a grudge against a non-Jew? What's the problem? Bearing a grudge only means against a Jew. Or the Torah says you should not hate another Jew in your heart. Doesn't say a non-Jew. It says a Jew, very specifically. So really, technically speaking, could I hate a non-Jew in my heart? Sure. Should I? Different issue. Technically, I could. Is it a good thing? No. I was going to say it's a good thing. Right? But again, if you're going to go according to what the Torah says, the Torah makes very clear. You're not allowed to hate a Jew in your heart. What do I understand from that? So where does a non-Jew fit here? Could I hate a non-Jew? I could. Should I? No. Shouldn't hate anybody. Jew or non, Jew or non-Jew. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter, but technically I could. Right? Technically I could. Somebody asked, when you say try and judge someone favorably, keep some Torah and mitzvahs. That includes Christians who at least hold to some biblical principles. Who says I have to believe Christians? Yeah. The fact that they totally misrepresent Torah, probably some of the biggest liars next to the Arabs in the world, right? Who says I have a mitzvah to judge them favorably? Yeah. Now, some people would say, well, what's better, a Christian or an atheist? Yeah, got this question before. A Christian's better. Why? At least they believe, at some level they believe in God. True. That's better than an atheist. Okay. Yeah, but at the same time, they're not keeping Torah mitzvahs. By any stretch, they're distorting the Torah. So who says I have to judge them favorably? They're they're distorting Torah. If I find them in a compromised position, The fact they don't hold by Torah mitzvahs, even as a Noahide, who says I have to judge them favorably? They got some biblical principles. Okay. So, yeah, it's not enough to tilt the scale. Definitely not enough to tilt the scale. Yeah, then we don't have an obligation to judge them favorably. What do you call it? A Muslim either. Even if they believe in one God, they're close. They're closer to being Noahides than Christians, right? That's true. But even a Muslim, I don't have to believe. They do all kinds of things to distort the Torah and other things. I have no mitzvah to, if I find a Muslim or a Christian or a Buddhist, right, or a Hindu, any of these people, and they're in a compromising situation, let's say, they're in a compromising situation. Is a mitzvah for me to judge them favorably? Do they believe in God? I don't think so. Yeah, definitely don't think so. Even if they have some principles that are good, okay. But the majority are bad, so we don't have an obligation. Someone says, as a JIT, we should help the widow and the orphans, yeah? If the person, let's say, becomes abusive and angry, and the advice is distance myself and end this help to the young adult, what should I do? So end it. Yeah. There's some charities better than others. So even if they help, even if they help orphans or whatever, find another organization. Right? Who says you have to be in contact with such a person? Or let's say you can circumvent the person. Even better. Let's say you want to still give that organization. And that person's abusive. Circumvent, if you can circumvent the person, not have to deal with them, deal with someone else, that'd be better. If not, then find another organization to give to. Dealing with abusive people, who said you have to? Even if it's helping another organization. So if you can help the organization without that person, good. So that's probably better. If not, you can find another organization to give to. Somebody asked if a person just gossips up a storm. Really difficult to be around. Would it be like murder if you had to know that you don't want to be around them because gossip, if it embarrasses them? That would be wrong to tell them or just move on. Sometimes you got to say something. See if you can change the conversation. If you can't change the conversation, whatever they say, you can't believe. You can't believe 100% unless it's something that you might have to guard yourself against. But there are times you have to say something. And you may have to say something, even if they're not going to listen. Right? Even if they're going to hate you more or hate Judaism more. They'll say, I don't care, I'll speak as much as I want. So, and you move on. Right? If you can't, if you have to be around that person, let's say somebody you work with, right? And that's all they do. You can tell them, you can try and explain to them, listen, I try not to speak gossip or listen to gossip, can you try better, this and that. If they outright just like make fun of you or say things, then you just move on. Then you just move on. Right? You could say something, 100%. If you think it's going to go somewhere, good. If you don't think it's going to go anywhere, maybe you should say something anyway, just for the future. And if they make fun of you and they say other things, so then you move on. Right? Then you would move on. I would say it's better probably to say something, and then if you see they're not going to listen, then you just move on, right? Or you can just move on, yeah. Right? If you think nothing good is ever going to come out of it, they're never going to listen anyway. So yeah, it's probably a moot point. Probably no point to say anything. Someone there says, right, at the, when you say Kriya Shema Mita, when you say Shema before you go to sleep, it says, even in transcendental past and future, right? Yeah, it's a mind-boggling thing. I think about it. I do think about it sometimes, before my head crashes, and I hit the pillow. But yeah, even in past lives, people have done things or whatever. Yeah, you forgive them. Yeah, it is pretty amazing. If you think about it, sometimes I'll just sit there and just like think about the words for a few seconds, like, wow, just like, it's like pretty deep, but like, however, we should mean it. That's, it's like we said before. Someone says in prayer when the word Selah is used, we strengthen prayer by pausing and thinking, or just saying the word is enough. I mean, you should think about it. I mean, for a little bit, not for very long, but it's always good to think about the prayers we say. Just, You got to keep certain pace, obviously, but when it's good to think about the words, a little bit. Doesn't have to be for very long, right? But it is good to try and internalize what the words mean. Definitely true. Someone says toxic relations verbally abusive. How's the best way to end it? Tell them or just avoid it? Probably just avoid them if possible. Um, telling them I don't know if it's gonna help. Maybe it just makes it worse. Potentially just makes it worse. If you keep it up. So yeah, it's probably just to ignore them. If they finally confront you, let's say you ignore them enough times and they confront it. If they confront it, they just tell them like, listen, like, you gotta stand up for yourself and just gotta say, like, this relationship's bad and whatever, and and you have to move on from it. Someone asks both responsibility and privilege because you'll be forgiven by your community, but you must also be able to forgive people in your community. You should. I'm not saying it's easy to do, but I'm saying that if you forgive someone for what they've done to you, God looks the other way, what you've done against him, measure for measure. So yeah, it's always good to forgive. Sometimes, if someone did something like, abusive or other things, it's hard to forgive. You may not have an obligation to forgive. There's a story when Jerusalem was getting bombed, by the Arabs, and a lot of people sitting in a bomb shelter, and a woman gets up. Husband left her in a guna, left her a chained woman, right? Because he refused to give her a get, give her a bill of divorce, right? Without going into all that, and it caused her a lot of problems. Really, a lot of whatever, a lot of problems. So she stood up and prayed to God and said out loud, "Listen, I forgive my husband for doing this to me. I forgive my husband for doing this to me." Chaim Shmulevitz at that time was in that same what do you call bomb shelter. He was the head of the yeshiva of Mir in Jerusalem, and he said I had no doubt that we're going to be saved on the basis of this woman. This woman was whatever, had a lot of problems. From her husband refused to give a bill of divorce and all that, caused a lot of aggravation. And she said, "I forgive you, God. You spare us. I forgive him. I forgive him with a full heart." That's potentially that could have bring that could bring the Messiah. If someone does such a thing. That's very hard. Very, very hard. Yeah. So imagine if someone forgave, I don't know, what someone did to them, and what they did to them was really, really bad. Was really, really bad. And imagine what doors that could open up for a person. I'm not saying the person's able to do it. It'd be a very hard thing to do. 100% a very hard thing to do. Yeah. This is what Rav Chaim Shmulevitz said. He said, based, the fact that we're getting bombed, Jews are getting bombed and the bombs going off all over the place. He said, I had no doubt we're going to be saved on the basis of what this woman said. So yeah, so you're going to ask me, is it better to forgive? Sure. 100% it's better. Is it always easy to? No. But again, if we forgive what others have done to us, God overlooks what we've done against him. But it's not so easy to do. Is it permissible to hear gossip about a non-Jew who doesn't keep the Noahide laws? I can hear gossip about any non-Jew. Any non-Jew, whether they hold by the Noahide laws or not, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Any non-Jew I can speak Lashon Hara against, right? I can hear Lashon Hara against. Now again, is it a good thing? You're going to pin me down and say, well, is that a good thing to do? No, it's not. Is it permissible? It's permissible. Right? It's not a good thing to do. Definitely not a good thing. You can hear it. It's definitely permissible. Yeah. But again, is it a good thing to do? I wouldn't say it's a good thing. But 100% it's permissible. Yeah. Let me see other a lot of interesting questions here. Yeah. Any other questions? All right, I'm gonna stop here. I just every Saturday, 2:30 Eastern time, 9:30 Israel time. Could be next few weeks, be about a half an hour earlier, because I normally do it earlier, but at 2 o'clock, but Shabbos getting out earlier now, so probably either next week or the week after, probably get back to the earlier time. Otherwise, anyone has any comments, find me on Facebook at Chaim Kaufman, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism, orthodoxconversion.com, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism on YouTube. There I got videos and Q&As, Ethics for Our Fathers, Book of Leviticus. Want to send me an email, rabbichaimkaufman@gmail.com, RBBI, CHAMCOFFMAN @gmail.com, whichever good. Middle of the day, end of the day, depending where you are, and everyone have a